The winter wind at Crestwood Station cut through the night like a knife, sharp and merciless. Swirling around the almost empty platform where a tired black woman named Mariah sat hunched on a metal bench, clutching a worn backpack to her chest as if it held the last pieces of her life. In a way, it did. She had nowhere to go now, after the shelter closed its doors. Not after the last job she held evaporated under a manager who had no patience for people he considered replaceable, and definitely not after the one person she loved, her ill mother, had passed away, quietly in her hospital bed just 3 weeks earlier. The echo of that loss followed her everywhere, settling into the silence like an unwanted shadow. But then came a sound she never expected to hear at this hour. Tiny footsteps. Rushing, stumbling, and then stopping right in front of her. She lifted her head, startled, and found herself staring into the wide, frightened eyes of a little girl, no older than 8. Her blonde hair tangled, her red coat torn at the sleeve, her breath visible in the frigid air. And before Mariah could speak, before she could even understand what she was seeing, the girl blurted in a trembling voice that carried more pain than any child should ever hold, "You have known home, and I have no mother." The words struck Mariah like a physical blow, and for a moment she simply stared, wondering if she had misheard. But the girl stood there trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. Clutching a small stuffed rabbit so tightly the seams looked ready to burst, Mariah slowly set her backpack down and crouched in front of the child. Her voice soft but strained with worry as she asked the girl what her name was, where her mother was, and why she was alone at a train station in the dead of night. But the girl only shook her head violently and backed away, casting frantic glances toward the darkened end of the platform as if she expected someone to appear at any moment. That was when Mariah realized the girl wasn't just lost, she was running from something, or someone. The wind howled, rattling the metal signs above them. But even through the noise, Mariah could hear the distant echo of heavy footsteps on pavement growing louder. The girl heard it too. She panicked, grabbed Mariah's sleeve, and whispered in a gravelly, cracked voice, "Please, don't let them take me back." Mariah's heart dropped into her stomach, instincts firing all at once. She grabbed the girl gently but firmly, pulling her closer into the shadows of the bench, trying to shield her with her own body. The steps grew louder, 2 men from the sound of it, maybe 3. Their voices drifted into the station, cruel, careless, mocking, as if they were hunting an animal rather than a terrified child. "Check the platform." "The brat couldn't have gotten far," one of them barked. And Mariah felt the girl's little hands clutch the fabric of her coat with desperate force. Mariah leaned down and whispered the only truth she could offer. "I'll protect you. I promise." But even as she said it, she felt fear prickling her spine. She had nothing, no home, no strength, no plan, but she had something she couldn't explain. A fierce certainty that she would not let this child be taken by men, whose voices dripped with danger. Just as the men stepped into the station lights, the girl looked up and whispered her name, "Leela," her voice trembling. And then she said something that made Mariah's breath freeze in her chest. "My mother didn't die in an accident. They killed her." The platform lights flickered. The wind howled again. And Mariah realized she was standing in the middle of something far darker than a simple case of a missing child. Lila's mother, a woman Mariah had never met, had been murdered on whatever she had known, whatever she had seen, had put her daughter in danger. The men were close now, scanning the benches, their boots echoing on the concrete as they searched. Mariah grabbed Leela's hand, whispered, "Stay quiet," shifted her body slightly so the men wouldn't see them behind the ticket machine. But then Mariah's luck ran out. One of the men spotted movement. He pointed. He shouted. And suddenly, the chase began. Mariah and Leela ran through the station, past the empty kiosk, past the trash cans rattling in the wind, their footsteps echoing as the men raced after them, shouting threats, each step closing the distance. Lila stumbled, and Mariah scooped her up despite the burning in her arms, sprinting down the stairs to the service hallway beneath the platforms. The lights flickered there too, casting eerie shadows across the walls. They ducked behind a maintenance door, both gasping for breath. Mariah pressed her ear to the door, listening to the men at the top of the steps arguing. Splitting up, dividing the station into hunting zones. Lila sobbed quietly into her chest, whispering, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," as if she believed any of this was her fault. Mariah tightened her arms around her. "Don't apologize. None of this is because of you." When the footsteps faded, Mariah knew they couldn't stay in the station. They had to leave, but where could they go? She had no home, no car, no money, except the crumpled $10 in her pocket. But she had promised to protect Lila, and promises were all she had left. They slipped out a side door into the icy night, the wind nearly knocking them over. The streets were mostly empty, lit only by flickering street lamps and neon signs humming weakly in the cold. Lila whispered that her mother had been a whistleblower. She had uncovered something at her job. Something dangerous involving powerful men, money laundering, and missing charity funds. She had planned to expose them. But before she could, they silenced her. Lila had overheard everything, and when they realized she knew, they came for her too. She had escaped through a window and ran straight into Mariah's life as they trudged through the dark. Mariah realized something that made her pulse race. The men had not been random thugs. Their coats, their radios, the way they moved, they were too organized, too professional. Whoever had killed Lila's mother wasn't just some petty criminal group. This was larger, more dangerous. And now they were hunting a child and a homeless woman who had stumbled into their path. They cut through alleyways, skidded through patches of ice, ducked behind dumpsters when headlights passed. Mariah felt her lungs burning, but she pushed forward, carrying Lila when she became too tired to run. They reached an abandoned storefront and slipped inside through a broken window, hiding behind old shelves as the night grew colder and quieter. But the quiet didn't last. A phone vibrated. Not Mariah, she didn't have one. It was Lila's, tucked inside her coat pocket. A cracked screen lit up the dusty room with a notification. Unknown sender. We know where you are. Mariah snatched the phone and turned it off, panic rising, and she realized something else. These people were tracking Lila. They would not stop. They would not quit. And neither would she. Lila's small hand reached for hers again, and in the dark, with fear pressing in from every side, Lila whispered the question no child should ever have to ask. Will they kill me too? Mariah pulled her close, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. Not as long as I'm breathing. But in her mind she wondered if she had just made another promise she wasn't strong enough to keep. She didn't know yet that the truth would take them into places far more dangerous than the empty station. She didn't know that the identity of the man behind everything would shake her to her core. And she didn't know the secret Lila's mother left behind, the one hidden object, could bring the entire criminal empire crashing down. If only they survived long enough to find it. And as they huddled in the cold, breath freezing in the air, Mariah heard the distant sound of car doors slamming, engines humming, and men shouting orders. They had found the trail again. The night was not over. The danger was not over. And the most terrifying truth of all was still ahead of them. The sound of engines rumbling outside the abandoned storefront sent a shiver through Mariah's spine, and she immediately pulled Lila deeper into the shadows. Crouching behind a crumbling shelf that smelled of mold and rust, the girl's tiny fingers dug into her sleeve, trembling so hard Mariah could feel the vibrations through her coat. She whispered for Lila to stay completely silent, and the child nodded, tears pooling in her eyes but not falling. Outside, multiple car doors slammed, heavy boots thudding across the pavement, their echoes bouncing off the empty buildings like a warning. Flashlights cut through the night, sweeping across the cracked windows of the storefront. Check every block. That kid is worth millions, one man barked, his voice muffled but sharp enough to slice through the thin walls. Millions. The word hung in the air like a curse. And Mariah instantly understood this wasn't just about silencing a witness. Someone had placed a reward on Lila's head, and not the kind that involved a safe return. This was a bounty for a corpse. Mariah's heart hammered. But she forced herself to stay calm, scanning the small, dusty room for another exit. There was nothing, no back door, no open window, only the jagged one they had climbed through. She couldn't risk going out that way again. Not with those men swarming the area like wolves. She looked back at Lila, the little girl shivering uncontrollably, and in that moment something inside Mariah hardened. She had been drifting through life for months, doing everything she could just to survive another day. But now this child was looking at her with pure trust, as if Mariah were the only solid thing left in her collapsing world. She had no home, no family, no sense of purpose left. But perhaps this was why fate had pushed her into that station tonight. Not to survive, but to protect someone who had even less than she did. She pulled Lila close, wrapped her coat around the girl, and whispered, "We're getting out now." She waited until the footsteps moved toward the far end of the block, then quietly lifted the loose wooden board, covering a gap in the walla. Narrow crack she had noticed earlier, but dismissed as too small. Desperate times removed old limits. She pushed her backpack through, then squeezed Lila out first, whispering instructions for her to duck low and crawl until she saw Mariah come out. The moment Lila slipped through the gap, Mariah followed, scraping her arms on the jagged wood, biting back a groan of pain so the men wouldn't hear. Outside, they found themselves in a narrow alley filled with broken crates and rusted metal bins. The cold air slapped them immediately, the wind cutting through their clothes. But at least they were out of sight. Mariah grabbed Lila's hand and began moving through the shadows, keeping close to the walls. Every sound, every car, every voice made her instincts flare like sparks. The city suddenly felt like a maze designed to trap them. They crossed alley after alley until they reached a small underpass beside the bridge. There Mariah stopped, panting heavily, her lungs burning. Lila leaned into her, clutching the stuffed rabbit as if holding on to hope itself. Mariah brushed the girl's hair back gently and whispered, "You're doing so well. I'm proud of you." Lila looked up, eyes shimmering with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. And for a moment, Mariah saw the child she should have been safe, warm. Loved not this hunted little soul forced to run through the streets in fear, but the reprieve didn't last. Before Mariah could catch her breath, a beam of light swept across the underside of the bridge, followed by a familiar voice barking orders. "Check the ally, she's close." Mariah stiffened, grabbing Lila and pulling her behind a concrete support beam just as two men appeared at the top of the slope. They scanned the darkness, their flashlights glinting off the wet pavement. One stepped closer, muttering into his radio that they needed backup. Mariah held her breath, praying he wouldn't see the faint outline of her shoe sticking out behind the beam. The man paused, squinted, and stepped toward them. Lila's grip tightened painfully. Mariah felt her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The man reached for his gun and then a train horn blared above, rattling the bridge violently and creating enough noise to mask Mariah's quick movement as she pulled Lila deeper behind the structure until the man turned away, convinced there was nothing there. When he walked off, Mariah exhaled shakily, wiping the sweat from her brow despite the freezing air. "We can't keep running like this," she whispered to herself. They crept along the side of the bridge until it opened into an industrial loading dock behind a closed bakery. There Mariah noticed faint light leaking from a door left slightly ajar. She hesitated, but the sound of cars approaching forced her to take the risk. She pushed the door open and slipped inside with Lila. The warmth from the ovens hit her like heaven, and for the first time in hours. Lila smiled, a small, fleeting flicker of comfort. But then a voice behind them said, "Who are you, and why are you in my shop?" Mariah spun around to see a middle-aged woman in a flour-dusted apron, holding a rolling pin like a weapon. Mariah raised her hands quickly and explained everything in a breathless rush. She told the woman about the men chasing them, about Lila's murdered mother, about the danger they were in. The baker's eyes softened when she looked at Lila, who still clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly. Without hesitation, the baker locked the door, lowered the shutters, and ushered them toward a small office behind the kitchen. "You're safe here," she said gently, offering Lila a warm pastry and setting a cup of tea in front of Mariah. "No one's getting in." But even as warmth slowly filled Mariah's numb fingers, she knew this safety was temporary. They couldn't stay here. The men had resources, contacts, money. They would find every open building, every hiding spot. Until they found Lila. Lila eventually fell asleep in Mariah's lap. Exhausted beyond measure, her small body rising and falling with each slow breath. The baker placed a blanket over them and sat quietly in the corner, watching with concern. Mariah stroked Lila's hair, whispering promises she prayed she could keep. For the first time since the station, she allowed herself to feel the gravity of what they were facing. A powerful group had killed Lila's mother. They had influence. They had reach. And the only thing standing between them and this child was her. A homeless woman no one noticed, no one counted, no one believed mattered. But Mariah mattered now. Lila had chosen her. Life had chosen her. Just as Mariah began drifting into a restless half-sleep, the baker nudged her awake, whispering urgently, "They're outside." Panic surged again. Peeking through the tiny gap beneath the shutter, Mariah saw dark vehicles parked across the street. The men were getting closer, fanning out, sweeping the area. The baker whispered, "There's a hidden door in the pantry. A delivery tunnel that connects to the old subway service line. No one uses it. You can escape through there." Mariah's pulse kicked. It was risky, dark, unknown. But it was their only chance. She woke Lila gently, whispering that they had to go. Lila nodded sleepily, but trusted her completely. They slipped through the pantry, pushed open a narrow metal door, and climbed down into the darkness of the old delivery tunnel. The air was damp, cold, and thick with dust. The baker closed the door behind them and whispered, "Good luck." Mariah took Lila's hand, guiding her through the narrow path illuminated only by a faint flickering emergency light. Somewhere above them, footsteps pounded into the bakery. The tunnel stretched endlessly, twisting into deeper shadows. But Mariah kept moving forward, whispering encouragement to Lila with every step. They didn't know where the tunnel led. They didn't know who would be waiting on the other side, but they had to keep going. They had to survive, because tomorrow held answers. Tomorrow held the truth. Tomorrow held the confrontation with the man whose face neither of them had yet seen, but whose power controlled the entire nightmare they were trapped in. And when that confrontation came, the world would finally understand the reason this little girl was being hunted,